Charles Dickens is renowned for his characterization and particularly the way he uses minor characters for comic effect. And so in Bleak House, around the three-dimensional main characters is a cast of supporting figures. These lack the nuance and interiority of the main characters, but Dickens uses them to sophisticated effect. By this I mean that the minor characters in Bleak House tend to be at once both specific and representative. Secondary characters in this novel tend to be somewhat caricatural. Each one might have a particular mannerism, usually comic, for example, which we dwell on, or each one might deploy a particular catchphrase repeatedly. But at the same time as this limitation and specificity, Dickens uses these minor characters as symbolic of greater issues such as charity and etiquette. The example I'm going to use now is Mr. Turveydrop, the dancing master's father, who dedicates himself to the enigmatic concept of deportment. Dickens' first readers would have detected as a sign of Turveydrop's foolishness his devotion to the Prince Regent, later King George IV. The Prince Regent was a vain and hedonistic man. He was an imbecile, notoriously indifferent to the world around him, not a great trait in a ruler. And the Prince Regent was a proponent of what would come to be called dandyism. As an impoverished gentleman, Mr. Turveydrop represents something of a paradox, with an implication that he believes being a gentleman could lie simply in striking the correct attitude. In Esther's description of Mr. Turveydrop, Dickens uses Esther's naivety as a device to introduce Turveydrop's hypocrisy. Esther struggles to evaluate Turveydrop because she can only do so at first as a series of negatives. She lists what is false: complexion, teeth, hair, whiskers. Mr. Turveydrop's bodily shape is also presented as kind of false. His unruly flab is strapped in to fit his outfit, at the same time as, contradictorily, he swells with pride. What Turveydrop does have, indisputably, is things. He has accessories, useless ones, canes and rings. The character of the old lady visiting the dancing school here seems to have been introduced by Dickens at this point only to elaborate on the introduction of Mr. Turveydrop, because this old lady supplies anecdotal information about Turveydrop to Esther. Via the old lady's account, Esther tells us of the reasonably well-connected wife who worked herself to death in service of her husband's vanity. When Mr. Turveydrop speaks to Esther, he does so with the manner of a knight or a hero, preserving gallantry as the world goes to hell. England decays as everybody becomes menial, and Turveydrop even laments his own son's lack of cultivation. The word deportment is the linchpin of this scene. It didn't have any particular significance to Dickens' readers. Then, as now, deportment referred to one's conduct with an emphasis on physicality, poise, bearing, posture, the way that you walk and speak. To Mr. Turveydrop, deportment is a spirit of living, as though he can assume or put on and enact an aristocratic identity to which he has no actual claim. Like Harold Skimpole, we might see Mr. Turveydrop as a bad man. Look how he treats his family, for instance, in gratification of his own vanity. But like Harold Skimpole, other characters in the novel find Turveydrop strangely attractive. We have characters who seem not very virtuous, who succeed by charming those around them. In Mr. Turveydrop, Dickens has in mind a type of middle-class person who affects aristocratic behaviours. Now, as a member of the upper class, it is viable to be willfully oblivious to the lower orders and simply to stay within one's elite social circles. But the same options aren't available to the middle-class person. You can't simply join the aristocrats by pretending to be one. The consequence is that someone like Mr. Turveydrop, adopting these attitudes, becomes eccentric and isolated. In both his specificity and his broader symbolism, Mr. Turveydrop fits in a set of characters in Bleak House who are self-absorbed but who would appear virtuous to other characters, and who are peculiarly attractive to people around them in the world of Bleak House. We could compare him, for instance, not only to Harold Skimpole, but to Mrs. Jellyby and Mrs. Pardiggle. Each of these characters is funny individually, but at the same time, each illuminates a social illness that appalls Charles Dickens.